Today we're exploring reversible 3-row eyelet lace stitch patterns. As with all reversible stitches, these beautiful lace patterns look the same on both sides and don't curl. In this video, we'll review the basic stitch pattern and several variations I developed, look at the resulting fabric, and explore project ideas. The basic stitch pattern is a 2-stitch 3-row repeat plus self-edge stitches. For this sample, I've cast on 5 multiples, so 2 times 5 plus 2 is 12 stitches. I like to slip the first stitch purlwise and knit the last stitch to get a nice edge. The basic 3-row lace stitch pattern is as follows. The first row is a knit row. This creates a purl bump on the row on the other side. Next is the lace row. For all the stitch patterns in this video, the eyelet is made with a yarn over, and the corresponding decrease is a knit 2 together. There are several options. I prefer to start with knit 2 together and end with the yarn over rather than the converse. I read my knitting constantly, so in case I forget the yarn over, I will notice right away on the next row instead of after almost 2 full rows. You can make the yarn over first and then the knit 2 together if you like, as long as you're consistent. The last row is also a knit row, which makes a corresponding purl bump row on the top of the lace row on the other side. You can see it clearly in the diagram. As with all 3-row repeat patterns, it's naturally reversible. Technically, it's a 6-row repeat with 3 rows alternating sides. When you read your knitting, you know you're on the lace row because you can see the yarn over, the last knit row of the previous pattern set, and the first knit row that looks like a purl on this side. It's very simple and versatile, which is what we'll talk about next. There are lots of options to modify the basic pattern to get different results. A nice variation is purling on each side of the lace row. It's subtly different. Here is a sample. The bottom section is a knit row, lace row, knit row. The top section is a purl row, the same lace row, and a purl row. The rows of the stitch pattern are more pronounced, with the knit-looking stitches sitting behind the purl-looking stitches. It makes a nice 3D effect. I also created a version with 2 rows of moss stitch between the lace rows. By lining up the knit and knit 2 together, a diagonal stockinette rib appears on each side for the 6 rows of the full repeat. It has a much lighter overall look because the moss stitch keeps the fabric more open than the garter stitch. I've linked my video on moss stitch in the description below. I've used a lighter yarn for this example, and that's what we'll talk about next. As with most lace, this stitch pattern looks much better with lighter yarn and needles. This sample is made with Aran weight or size 4 yarn and 5mm needles. I can see this working for large coasters or trivets, but perhaps not so well for wearable items. This yarn is fingering weight with size 3mm needles, and it looks much nicer even with the mishmash of stitch patterns on the swatch. The first 2 rows are the basic knit stitch pattern, the section in the middle is with the purl variation, and the top section is moss. I'm sure with sock yarn or crochet cotton it would be very delicate looking. For your project, you can add a border if you like, although it's of course not necessary to prevent curling like with most single-sided lace patterns. It will increase the structural integrity of the fabric if that's what you're envisioning. For the thicker weight yarn, I added a 3-stitch garter border. For the fingering weight yarn, I wanted to see how it would look with just the self-edge stitches. The inspiration for this video came from this cowl vest I made from yarn I found in Scotland. It's called Heather, and the color is amazing. It also has a garter border on the sides and on the top and bottom. The cowl neckline is made by increasing the top section of the front piece on each side, and the back is straight. The stitch is the basic knit-based stitch pattern, and I'm very happy with the result. For this yellow accessory scarf I'm working on, I decided to add 1 stitch of moss border so that last lace eyelet would be a bit bigger. I'm using the moss version of the stitch pattern, which I think is a great complement for this yarn. You can also make the fabric heavier by replacing the lace row with a purl row every so often. In this way, the pattern reverts to the dune stitch and emphasizes the horizontal stripes. I've linked my video on the dune stitch in the description below. Because of the natural drape of lace fabric, I can also envision soft cowls or even wraps using this stitch. This stitch pattern is a great canvas for integrating more complicated lace patterns by exchanging only some yarn overs with purl or even knit stitches. And of course, the fabric would be reversible and not curl. For the next video, we'll be continuing to look at reversible lace stitches with the purse or mesh stitch. It's much easier to create than you'd think, and it has a very unique look, very different from most eyelet-based lace knitting stitch patterns. So pick up your knitting and create something awesome. I'll do my best to respond to comments, and I'd love to hear about your favorite reversible knitting pattern. Also feel free to subscribe to my channel for more awesome reversible knitting. For those of you still here, the last few years I've been working hard to find simple ways to feel better, what I call my daily well-being practices. This is not medical advice, I'm just sharing what works for me. Today's well-being practice is far viewing. We spend much of our day looking up close at things, in our houses and at work, and especially at screens. We are meant to look far off as well. In fact, it's very good for our eyes and brains and mental health. Whenever I can throughout the day, I take a minute to look as far off as I can, especially if there's a view. Looking at tall trees or valleys or mountains, if you're lucky, is awe-inspiring and helps our brains take a pause and recover. Even looking out a window at the grass or bushes is beneficial. Man-made structures work as well, tall buildings or bridges, anything you can see and admire. After you look wide, focus in on one aspect as far away as you can, a branch or treetop, an animal, or a pleasing bit of architecture. Take a deep breath in and out through the nose, and let the stress flow out. There are many videos on mindfulness and far viewing. They are easy to find. Have a great day. For this sample, I've cast on 5 multiples, so 2 times 5 plus 2 self edges is 16 stitches. Oh, that's not true. 2 times 5 is 10 plus 2 is 12.